Good afternoon. Today we shall be discussing Matthew Arnold's poem Dover Beach. Now, as we know, Dover Beach is a lyric poem by Matthew Arnold published in 1867 in a collection of poems titled New Poems, but surviving notes indicate that the poem might have been written as early as 1850. The title, locale, and subject of the poem's descriptive opening lines are based on the shore of the English port of Dover in Kent, which faces Calais at the opposite end of the Dover Strait, and the narrowest part of the distance, as it were, is apparently 21 or 20 miles. This will be evident, this information will be necessary when we will be seeing references later on in the poem where he speaks of looking at the other side of the strait that separates Dover with Calais. At an obvious level, the meaning and mood of the poem are objectified in the sea tide imagery, which runs almost throughout the text. In the opening scene, the moonlight on the water represents the beauty of nature or of the world, and the cacophonous sound of the tide suggests that the harmony of the scene is illusory, that beauty is only appearance. This motif is reinforced by reference to moon-blanched land. The connotative disparity between fair and blanche, we may say, points to the contrast in idea and feeling that informs the first stanza of the poem. These connotative motifs are continued in the second stanza. The dragging rhythm and the noisy confusion of a retreating tide had suggested to Sophocles the turbid ebb and flow of human misery, quote unquote, a thought similar to that which occupies the mind of the narrator of the poem as he contemplates the loss of faith in traditional religion. The description of the sea of faith is, of course, a projection of the description of the opening scene of the poem. It was too at one time at full tide. Its bright folds reminds us of the moonlight on the streets of Dover, and the dissonance of its retreat is now experienced by the observer. Furthermore, the contrast in which breath of the night wind appears makes this phrase contrast connotatively with the earlier reference to sweet night air in much the same way that blanche contrasts with fair. What remains as the water retreats inland, the barren spaces of the beach left behind become, by metaphoric extension, the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. The emotional movement pertinent in this connection is the shift from the mood of aesthetic pleasure, which becomes bound up with the idea of metaphysical and moral security, to that of terror or dismay, which is a result of the awareness of moral and metaphysical abandonment. The moonlight on the water then symbolizes clearly the world of illusion, a world like that which was secured by the bright girdle of the sea of faith, and underneath the beautiful illusion lurks the nightmare world of reality, the waste spaces poked by coarse dark pebbles. These images lead naturally to the explicit statement of the theme, which comes at the beginning of the final stanza of the poem. Though the phrase land of dreams is based on the image of the moonlight, which lies pale and beautiful, I believe that fair encompasses both of these meanings on water. It is logically justified because it may be regarded as more or less a generic poetic statement. More important, the concluding image of the poem is, structurally speaking, just as logical, though in a different way. The shock of the transfer from sea type to land soldier imagery contributes to the impact of the idea. But what makes the passage even more effective is the fact that the transition of images is organic. They are so linked to one another that it becomes very difficult for a critic to isolate and analyze them separately. The image of the darkling plain, reality, is an extension of the image of that part of the beach which is darkened by the shingles that have been left behind by the retreating tide. Similarly, the image of the ignorant armies clashing by night is clearly an imaginative extension of the image of waves breaking and sweeping backward as though in noisy confusion and flight. A poetic parallel to this effect may be found in Dylan Thomas's metaphor of the sea tumbling in harness in his famous poem, A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London. The references in Dover Beach to darkness, confusion, and retreat provide an important structural contrast to the description of the sea of fate at high tide. There is the characterizing figure of a white hood-like effect of a wave at its crest, securing the world for an all too brief instant in time, like a bright girdle furled. It is clear that the poem itself moves from light to darkness, paralleling its thematic movement as a whole from faith to disillusionment, or from the wholly literal to the wholly metaphorical, from small abstractions to large ones, from past to present. At the same time, the poem builds on a series of dualisms or contrasts. The most ironic of them is the contrast between the tranquil scene and the restless incertitude of the speaker. But the most powerful contrast is that between the land and the sea. The sea in particular evokes a rich variety of symbolic values in the poem. A sense of time and constant change, of vitality, the waters of baptism and birth, also a sense of blankness, formlessness, and mystery. One could think of the land-sea conflict as one between man and nature, or present and past, or between even the dry critical mind and a natural, spontaneous, self-sufficient existence represented by the sea. One could even think of the sea as a kind of providence, failing to master the necessity represented by the eternal note of the pebbles. The sea is stable as faith is, yet it has its ebb and flow and spray, turbid like human misery. Similarly, the land is itself solid and coherent, but its pebbles and shingles are atomistic and agitated, as though the point of misery and conflict were right at the edge of the mingling of land and sea. The dualism of the poem shows in its structure as well. Each of the four stanzas divides quite markedly into two parts. In stanzas 1, 3, and 4, the first part is hopeful. The second undercuts illusion with reality, which is grim. In every case, illusion is presented in terms of sight and reality in terms of sound. Thus, the poem moves back and forth from the optimistic images of sight to the pessimistic images of sound. We can perhaps think of hearing as a more contiguous sense, the more subtle sense, but the sounds that dominate the poem are alarms of battle and grating and withdrawing roars. The poem builds on this manifold dualism, but at the same time it presses steadily forward, with each stanza referring to the one preceding. There is a kind of five-part structure as the poem moves from a setting to a dramatic situation to a transitional passage. which is the second stanza, to an ethical philosophical comment, which approximates the third stanza. Finally, that philosophical comment converts to a seemingly unrelated image with a shock of abruptness and strangeness. The poem ends as it began, in duality. A sense of two-ness, as it were, runs through the various attempts by the explicators to state the idea that informs and pervades the poem. For example, some have commented on the poet's melancholy awareness of the terrible incompatibility between illusion and reality, while others have commented on the repetitive inclusiveness of the human condition and its purposeless gyrations, while still others have stressed on tragic sense of eternal recurrence, and almost then claiming that the sea rhythm of the world in general and also of the poet's soul, which finds itself mysteriously in accordance with that cosmic pulse. Essentially and generally, the poem moves back and forth between the here and there, past and present, land and sea, love and battle, but more importantly, between sweet sight and disillusioning sound, between appearance and reality. What informs the poem then is an attempt to recreate in a personal relationship the sweet sight of stability and permanence, which the harsh sound of the actual ebb and flow of reality negates. Thank you.